Throughout time, people across the world told each other tales of how they came to be, of heroes and monsters, romance and tragedy, death and rebirth. Mythology helped shape the ancient world, explaining the unexplainable. This is Mythology Unleashed.
In Western culture, perhaps no other fairy tales are as profound and widespread as those once collected by the brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm. Tales of family and love, beasts and monsters, elves and giants, frog kings and iron stoves, cautionary tales such as Little Red Riding Hood, coming-of-age stories such as The Boy Who Went Forth to Learn Fear, adventure stories such as The Brave Little Tailor, and love stories like Rapunzel all originated in Germanic folklore and found a home within the pages of Grimm's fairy tales. But just who exactly were the brothers Grimm? Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm, born 1785, and Wilhelm Karl Grimm, born 1786, were the oldest of 9 children, born to a prosperous lawyer turned district magistrate, and the daughter of a castle councilman. The 2 brothers were practically inseparable, overcoming adversity in the form of familial deaths, financial struggle, and health issues. In time, they would attend the University of Marburg, where they would meet Professor Friedrich Karl von Savigny and his brother-in-law Clemens Brentano. Savigny and Brentano went on to introduce the two to medieval manuscripts filled with stories, as well as old German literature filled with romances, poetry, folklore, and songs. Instantly intrigued, Jacob and Wilhelm would continue to study folklore and ancient literature, learning various languages to further their pursuits, and making small name for themselves as scholars. In 1806, Brentano and associate Achim von Arnim were intent on publishing a volume of German tales of oral tradition, and commissioned the brothers to collect folk tales from across the countryside. Jacob and Wilhelm took their assignment to heart, spending years collecting old books and manuscripts, gathering tales from friends and strangers alike, from the common folk of the land to the wealthy aristocrats. In 1812, the brothers Grimm had their first volume published, titled Kinder- und Hausmärchen, or Children's and Household Tales, containing 86 unique German folk tales. The collection would undergo several updated editions, adding more and more stories until the 7th and final edition, released in 1857, contained more than 210 stories. These stories would go on to become staples of childhoods in the Western world. Such famous tales as Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin, Cinderella, The Golden Goose, The 6 Swans, and so many more are found among the titles. It is important to note that none of these stories were originally created by the brothers Grimm. However, that did not stop them, as well as their publishers, from heavily revising and embellishing many of the collected tales. The stories originally collected were criticized for not being suitable for children, in both subject matter and scholarly analysis. Absurdity and tragedy were downplayed, violence was scaled down, and sexual references were removed entirely. By the 7th edition, many of the original tales were nigh unrecognizable. Yet it was to their own benefit, as the Grimms went from respected scholars to best-selling authors, and their collected volume of fairy tales became the 2nd most read book in Germany after the Christian Bible. The fairy tales collected by the brothers Grimm aimed to teach important morals about life, showing recurring themes about the structures of family and society as a whole, particularly emphasizing the yearning for social mobility. These issues are primarily explained through exaggerated portrayals of beauty, violence, poverty, and wealth. Families in these stories are often chaotic, with parents who are wicked or inept, and make mistakes with grave consequences. As a result, the children are always the ones who suffer, finding themselves in dangerous and chaotic situations, but in the end, are always successful in either saving themselves or being saved by someone mystical. Many stories begin with starvation and poverty, and progress to a successful ending of wealth and a higher social standing, often as a result of marriage. In essence, the brothers Grimm believed in the idea of happily ever after. The Grimms intended to trace and grasp the essence of cultural evolution and to demonstrate how natural language stemming from the needs, customs, and rituals of the common people created authentic bonds and helped forge civilized communities. Though brusque and raw, and later heavily revised and idealized, the Grimm's fairy tales still resonate with us today because they indicate how we can transform ourselves and our environments in order to live in a better world. And this hope for a better world and a better future leads many to strive for their own version of happily ever after.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. These simple words, written down on a blank piece of paper, would go on to be the start of one of the most compelling worlds of fiction in literary history. English author J.R.R. Tolkien was the mastermind behind The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, two of many stories that take place within the fantastical world of Middle-earth. A world filled with magic and mystery, war and wrath, sword and sorcery, good and evil. A world filled with wizards and demons, elves and dwarves, heroes and villains. Epic quests, heroic journeys, evil forces and magical rings. Though Tolkien's works have been seen as some of the most influential in the fantasy genre, with many authors citing him as inspiration for their own works, Tolkien himself was inspired by many stories of mythology and folklore. From Greek, Norse, and Celtic mythology, to Arthurian legend, to Grimm's fairy tales, to the Bible. This program will discuss the mythical origins of Tolkien's legendarium. In order to better understand the world of Tolkien, one must first examine the man himself. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born to English parents on January 3, 1892, in Bloemfontein, Orange Free State, in what is now part of modern-day South Africa. At 4 years old, Tolkien's mother Mabel returned to England with her two sons, John and his younger brother Hilary, following their father's passing. From his mother, Tolkien developed a deep love of language, literature, and storytelling, fostering John's early imagination and creativity. Additionally, Tolkien also had an Icelandic nanny named Thorgud Gísladóttir, who introduced to him the Norse language, folklore, and mythology. Tolkien lived a colorful childhood, filled with joys yet marred with tragedies, surviving the death of his mother, being raised by family friend and Roman Catholic priest, Father Francis Morgan, studying religion, folklore, language, and philosophy, and exploring the forests and fields near his home, both on his own and in the company of dear friends, fueling his creativity and inspiring the vivid landscapes of Middle-earth. As an adult, Tolkien lived through the horrors of World War I, serving as a second lieutenant in the British Army, and participating in the Battle of the Somme, and would later attend Oxford University, where he studied classical literature and philology. putting his love of storytelling and foreign languages at the forefront of his life. Tolkien began his academic career as an Anglo-Saxon professor at the University of Leeds in 1920, before moving to the University of Oxford, where he held the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon position from 1925 to 1945, as well as serving as a tutor and lecturer in English language and literature at Pembroke College and Merton College, where he taught courses on medieval literature, Old English, Middle English, and Norse mythology. As a teacher and scholar, he was widely renowned for his enthusiasm, erudition, and engaging teaching style. It is said that one day in the early 1930s, while he was working through school certificate papers, Tolkien found a blank page among the documents and felt a sudden wave of inspiration. He began to write down the beginning of what would go on to become There and Back Again, better known as The Hobbit, sowing the seeds of his legendarium, influenced by his professional and personal life, his time as a student and later teacher of myth and language, as a soldier, a philologist, and more. Through the Middle-earth saga, Tolkien created a conduit for many languages he had developed, and an outlet for his love of mythology and storytelling. In creating his literary world, Tolkien envisioned his legendarium as a mythological prehistory to the current mundane world, complete with fantastical elements, but with shards of truth scattered within. Tolkien's world was known as Middle-earth, a name taken almost directly from Norse mythology, whose mortal realm was referred to as Midgard, or Middle-earth. And like Norse myth, Tolkien's Middle-earth is predominantly populated by races of men, elves, dwarves, as well as other beings such as wizards, little folk, giants, both good and evil in nature, and ancient beings of the woods. Tolkien's elves are described as the wisest and fairest of all beings, much like the elves of Norse mythology, and dwell within mystical cities, such as Rivendell and Mirkwood, that are set physically within the mortal world, yet have an almost alien aspect surrounding them, not unlike Celtic otherworlds such as Annwn or Tir na Nog, the home of gods and supernatural beings of Celtic mythology. Their counterpart, Tolkien's dwarves, are nearly identical to those from Norse and Germanic legends and fairy tales, depicted as mountain-dwelling, stout, bearded fellows who are excellent miners and craftsmen. The humans of Middle-earth are depicted as comparably plain and ordinary, with many of them desiring power more so than any other race, and many of them scared or otherwise unwilling to rise above oppressive forces. However, there are a select few, both men and women, who do the impossible, rallying warring kingdoms, slaying evil monsters, and doing the undoable, a theme that recurs in countless mythologies, where select few stand out among the mundane and cowardly masses, and stand their ground in the face of insurmountable odds. Additionally, the world of Middle-earth has no shortage of monstrous beasts, some that strongly resemble creatures of legend such as dragons, trolls, vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, denizens of the undead, and more. But Tolkien's imagination supplied many fabulous and terrifying creatures that dwell within Middle-earth, such as menacing spider creatures, including Shelob and her kin, gargantuan pachyderms called Mamakil or Oliphants, and the Balrogs, immense and powerful demons of fire and shadow. And amidst these gods, men, ethereal beings, and monsters, exist many overlooked beings, such as hobbits, characters who are not portrayed as inherently strong or wise or brave, preferring to live quiet lives, minding their own business, and away from conflict or excitement, yet are frequently shown as catalysts for massive change in the world of Tolkien. The cornerstone story of Middle-earth, The Lord of the Rings, centers around the Dark Lord Sauron, a fallen Maiar, with a desire to conquer and control the whole of the world and every living soul in it. Sauron was a loyal follower of Morgoth, formerly known as Melkor, and once a prominent member of the Ainur, who served the creator god Eru Ilúvatar. Morgoth rebelled against Ilúvatar, in a manner nigh identical to the conflict of Satan and the Christian god, and was responsible for the birth of evil and darkness in Tolkien's world. After the defeat of Morgoth, Sauron went on to continue in his former master's footsteps, planting seeds of deceit, deception, and destruction in order to claim the world for himself, acting as a very satanic figure in his own right. In his scheme for complete domination, Sauron employs a host of strategies, political manipulation, and societal upheaval throughout the major points of the map, hollow promises of power to various figures of authority, and a vast army of monsters and demonic forces. Sauron's armed forces primarily consist of creatures that were once elves that had fallen for the dark powers, corrupted and mutilated into a hideous form of life. Orcs. Thousands upon thousands of squat, twisted monsters whose sole purpose is naught but war and destruction, embodying evil, corrupting purity, conquest, and industrial warfare, and bearing more than a passing resemblance to the ogres and monsters of Grimm's fairy tales and English folklore. In addition to orcs, Sauron employs savage trolls, giant wolves, demons of the pit, even vampires and werewolves, all of whom greatly inspired by various European mythologies, yet all given a unique twist that endears them to Tolkien's world. Sauron's most loyal servants, however, are the 9 ring wraiths, the Nazgul, once powerful kings of men who would fall into darkness and the powers of Sauron, appearing as black cloaked figures astride black horses or upon the backs of ferocious dragons, likely inspired, at least partially, by the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse from the Book of Revelation, among other eerie specters of doom. Sauron has access to vast magical powers and legions of dark creatures at his command, but by far, Sauron's most powerful weapon is the One Ring, a magical item forged by Sauron himself that grants its wearer the power to control the free peoples of Middle-earth, bending their wills to that of the ring-bearer. Magical rings are found throughout many mythologies across the world, and they are as plentiful and unpredictable as they are in Middle-earth. Some, like the legendary Ring of Solomon from Arabic folklore, allow the wearer to control demons and spirits, while other rings, such as those seen in the Mabinogion or Arthurian legend, turn the wearer invisible or insane. Magical rings are popular motifs in mythology and literature because they are small in size, fitting on fingers or easily concealed in pockets, the circular form representing infinity, but most importantly, because they are unassuming in appearance, and the One Ring of Power is no different. Though the creation of the ring empowered Sauron beyond comprehension, it came with a severe cost. Sauron infused almost the entirety of his power within the ring, making him utterly dependent upon it. Should any other come across it, they would be filled with a burning desire for possession of the ring that often leads to bloodshed, and any who should wear it would turn invisible. The ring would also extend its wearer's life, defying natural aging, and gradually corrupting them with the malevolence Sauron embedded within it. Sauron would eventually lose the One Ring, effectively ending his reign over Middle-earth, at least for a time. During the Battle of the Last Alliance, in Sauron's domain Mordor, a volcanic, desolate wasteland that strongly resembles Hell or Tartarus, the ring was cut from his very finger by Isildur, the king of Gondor, effectively destroying his mortal form. But Isildur quickly fell to the influence of the ring, and he claimed it for himself. As the story progresses, we learn that the One Ring, like many cursed objects in myth and superstition, has a will of its own, one as dark and twisted as its master and creator. As it had no other master, the ring strove to return to Sauron by manipulating those who would come across it. The ring betrayed Isildur to his death, breaking the lineage of kings and weakening the dominion of man, and the ring itself was lost to time. Meanwhile, Sauron would bide his time, gradually rebuilding his strength, and taking the form of a massive, lidless eye atop a tower, wreathed in flame and all-seeing, an image that some scholars have likened to the Eye of Balor, the Fomorian king from Irish mythology, whose staring gaze likewise saw to the death of entire armies. Centuries after the death of Isildur, the ring would come into the possession of a halfling named Smeagol, acquired after he slew his relative Deagol for it. This particular scene harkens back to the Volsunga saga, which tells a tale featuring a magical gold-finding ring called Anvaranot. The ring's original owner, Andvari, cursed the ring to bring misfortune on the one who possessed it, after it had been stolen by the god Loki. Anvaranot eventually came to the dwarven king Hreidmar, but it quickly caught the attention of Hreidmar's son, Fafnir. Mercilessly, Fafnir killed his own father, stole the cursed ring, and turned into a ferocious dragon. Like Fafnir, Smeagol's greed and cruelty, all for a magical ring, would lead to him turning into a skulking creature known as Gollum, long considered a diminutive version of the Beowulf monster Grendel, and he haunted the misty mountains, with the One Ring poisoning his mind and cursing him with an incredibly long life. But Gollum would also come to lose the ring, this time to a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. In the novel The Hobbit, Bilbo was in the midst of a quest, aiding a company of dwarves to retake the Lonely Mountain from an evil dragon, when he was separated from the company, and found himself in the gloom of Gollum's cave. After secretly stealing the One Ring, Bilbo's only chance of escaping Gollum's clutches was in winning a game of riddles in the dark, a scene that has been compared many times to the story of Oedipus from Greek mythology. In this tale, Oedipus wandered to the outskirts of the city of Thebes, where he was cornered by the monstrous Sphinx, who, like Gollum, challenged the protagonist to a deadly game of riddles, one which Oedipus won. In a number of scenes, Bilbo acts as a quintessential trickster, a figure found in every mythology across the globe, using wits and cunning to subdue a much more powerful opponent. Towards the beginning of the novel, Bilbo spurs a trio of hungry trolls into bickering with one another until the sun comes up, turning them all to stone, a scene reminiscent of Odysseus' standoff with the Cyclops Polyphemus. Later on, after achieving the One Ring, Bilbo encounters the dragon Smaug, and spurs his wrath when searching through his hoard of stolen treasure, a scene practically lifted from the Epic of Beowulf. Though Bilbo may be small in stature, and far from the typical warrior one may envision when discussing heroes and dragons, he manages to reach monumental heights with his cunning, like the tricksters of old. When his adventure at last came to an end, Bilbo kept the One Ring in his possession for 60 years in his home of Bag End in the Shire. In time, Bilbo would pass the One Ring on to his nephew, Frodo, who would become the primary target of the forces of Sauron, and embark on a perilous quest in order to destroy the ring and topple Sauron's ever-growing power forever. Frodo Baggins goes on what some mythologists refer to as the hero's journey. Proposed by mythologist Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, or the monomyth, is a pattern in storytelling with loosely set stages, where a character is torn from their status quo life by a call to action, going on a life-changing journey filled with allies and enemies, encounters with the supernatural that come close to taking the protagonist's life, only for them to rise to the challenge, overcome their labors, and return changed forever. The hero's journey motif can be seen throughout ancient mythology, from Hercules to Ivan Tsarevich to Naja. But whereas most heroes of myth are bestowed with fanciful abilities or traits that make them stand out from others, Frodo is, for better or worse, a very average being. As a hobbit, he is short in stature, not a trained warrior or a seasoned adventurer, having been raised in a tranquil and nonchalant society as the Shire his entire life. By undertaking the hero's journey, Frodo becomes a reluctant warrior, undergoing a dangerous odyssey, not for the glory or action or adventure, or even to atone for dark deeds of the past, but in order to keep his home safe. With such a burden placed upon the halfling's shoulders, Frodo is not expected to survive, much less complete such a quest. But as with many heroes' journeys, Frodo is granted aid in the form of 8 companions, collectively referred to as the Fellowship of the Ring. The 9 members of the Fellowship consist of fellow hobbits Samwise or Sam Gamgee, Meriotic Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, better known as Merry and Pippin, as well as the elf archer Legolas, the dwarf Gimli, and 2 men, Boromir of Gondor, and the Dunedain ranger, Strider, or Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Aragorn is Tolkien's iteration of the archetypal hero, destined to become Elisar, the king of the reunited kingdom of Gondor and Arnor, forever a thorn in the side of Sauron, and greatly inspired by the story of King Arthur, perhaps England's best-known hero of legend. Arthur and Aragorn are both the descendants of deceased monarchs killed in combat, and are the rightful heir to the throne. Both individuals were stripped of their rightful kingdoms, and were at risk of being assassinated, with their lineage coming to an end if they were to be killed. Arthur and Aragorn were secretly raised in foster homes, receiving protection from a foreign noble, who so happens to be a distant relative, Arthur being reared in the castle of Sir Ector, while Aragorn was raised in Rivendell, in the House of Elrond. Furthermore, both heroes demonstrate remarkable fighting prowess and exceptional abilities of survival, leadership, and diplomacy throughout their respective journeys, and both develop romantic feelings for otherworldly women, but must successfully navigate challenges that appear insurmountable before they could ever achieve victory in romance and destiny. Challenges made somewhat easier down the line with the gift of a magically forged sword. The Fellowship are led by the wizard Gandalf, a powerful wizard and a mentor figure to practically all who he encounters. Having lived for thousands of years, Gandalf possesses a deep knowledge of the world, its peoples, its languages, its creatures, and its magic. Wandering the countryside, in the familiar form of a tall, elderly man with a long grey beard, a staff in hand, and a pointed cap, echoing the ancient legends of Odin, the king of the gods of Asgard in Norse mythology, and especially the wizard Merlin, famous for being the mentor of King Arthur. As with Odin and Merlin, and many other bearded wise figures throughout legend and literature, Gandalf is an enigmatic figure, always speaking in riddles, and thinking of things several steps ahead and around all others. The members of the Fellowship were all capable in their own way, but having Gandalf leading their expedition was certainly a great comfort for all, and what's more, he was also a close friend to Frodo, having joined Bilbo on his quest decades earlier. But Gandalf's time with Frodo and the Fellowship would be cut short, as when they passed through the abandoned dwarf kingdom of Moria, a Balrog was accidentally awakened, and Gandalf sacrificed himself in an epic battle against the demon of the shadows. The surviving members of the Fellowship escape Moria and make their way to the elven realm of Lothlorien, a place of healing ruled by the Lady Galadriel. While Galadriel only has so large of a role in the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, her presence is quite oracular, bordering on that of a goddess, seeing things no others can, and possessing powers that mortals can never truly fathom. Through Galadriel, Tolkien channels the likes of Circe, the Oracle of Delphi, and the Lady of the Lake, Nimue. And through Galadriel, Frodo learns just how heavy his burden truly is, and the absolute cost of his appointed task. Galadriel sends the Fellowship on their way, healed and with gifts, but their troubles from here on only exacerbate. A key element to many adventures and epic quests of mythology that Tolkien firmly adheres to in his works is the crescendo of difficulty. As the stories progress, the hardships, both external and internal, seem to become harder and harder for the heroes. In Beowulf, the titular hero battles Grendel, followed by Grendel's mother, and culminating in a battle with a dragon. In Greek mythology, the labors of Hercules, the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts, and the trials of Odysseus gradually increase in how dangerous and seemingly impossible they are, and tear away at their respective protagonists. In the Chinese epic Journey to the West, the monk Tang Sengzang, Sun Wukong, and their companions faced countless physical and emotional struggles that would continue on for many years before reaching their goal. Though the journey of Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring would go on to become more challenging as it went on, as with the old stories of heroism, the greater the challenges became, the closer they were to achieving their ultimate victory. But the path to victory would nonetheless be taxing on both body and spirit. The Fellowship would continue to splinter, following the loss of Gandalf. Boromir gave in to his desire for the ring, attempting to wrest it from the Hobbit by force, and would shortly thereafter be killed by a pack of orcs, who would capture Merry and Pippin, prompting Aragorn and the others to give chase. Frodo continued his journey to Mordor with Sam, his faithful companion who never once left his side, and be guided by the treacherous creature Gollum, who was torn between wanting to be free of the ring forever and wanting to regain and forever possess his precious. As Gollum guides the two hobbits through the wilds and into Mordor, Aragorn and the others come across countless enemies, such as the fallen wizard Saruman, a parallel to the Slavic figure Kashai the Deathless, his treacherous henchman Grima Wormtongue, a sniveling coward who manipulates Theoden, the king of Rohan, like the cunning tricksters of Grimm's fairy tales, and their vast army of super orcs called the Uruk-hai. But they are not without help, for Gandalf returns from beyond the grave, stronger and more powerful than ever before, akin to a figure like Jesus Christ, or a phoenix rising from the ashes. Gandalf sends Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli to aid the kingdom of Rohan, freeing Theoden from the machinations of Grima and his master, culminating in the epic Battle of Helm's Deep. The Battle of Helm's Deep echoes scenes from the Iliad, where an impregnable fortress is laid siege by wave after wave of enemy forces. Under the leadership of Aragorn and Theoden, and with aid from the warrior woman Éowyn and her brother Éomer, both characters heavily influenced by warriors from Norse myth, the Rohirrim drive off the invading forces and force Saruman and his Dark Master from the realm of Rohan. And somewhere in the desolate mountains and boggy swamps surrounding Mordor, Frodo continued his journey, with Gollum acting as the devil on one shoulder, and Sam acting as the angel on the other. All the while, the ring was slowly taking his life. As the long and deadly journey took its toll on Frodo, every moment he was battling the urge to give in to the influence of the ring, to fully give in to darkness. A truly hopeless situation, where the odds looked bleak, yet he still persisted, proving himself more a hero than even he ever believed he could be. The trio managed to survive a number of perils, but Gollum betrays the two hobbits, leading them into the lair of Shelob, the spider monster. Frodo falls victim to Shelob's venom, and is nearly killed by Shelob, were it not for the bravery of Sam, who manages to drive off the monster with newfound courage, Frodo's sword's sting, and a magical gift from Galadriel. While not Frodo and Sam's final obstacle, Shelob acts as a sort of gatekeeper to a path that separates two worlds, something common in many European mythologies, and to overcome this obstacle would bring the heroes closer to fate, but maybe not victory. The War of the Ring continued into the realm of Gondor, before the walls of Minas Tirith, a city that had for generations held back many of the forces of Mordor, but had gradually grown weaker and weaker with the absence of a true king, and generations of incompetent stewards. Sauron sent forth his strongest armies, led by the leader of the Nazgul, the Witch King of Angmar. The forces of Sauron laid siege to Minas Tirith and the army of Gondor, not unlike the Trojan War of Greek mythology, or the Battle of Camlan from Arthurian legend. But through the combined efforts of the Fellowship, namely Aragorn and Gandalf, who succeeded in rallying Rohan and Gondor, and leading an army of ghostly warriors, the tide turned against Sauron. The Battle of Pelennor Fields and Siege of Gondor ended with great losses on both sides, including the death of Theoden, and the demise of the Witch King at the sword of Éowyn. But the city was saved, and hope was kindled. As Frodo and Sam make their way through Mordor, having survived a clutch of orcs, they find their way to Mount Doom, the birthplace of the One Ring, and the only place that it could be destroyed, blocked by thousands of orc soldiers, and overseen by the great eye of Sauron, all momentarily unaware of the presence of the two hobbits. But as luck would have it, the orcs made their way to the gate of Mordor, the eye of Sauron watching the event transpire as Mordor is emptied. It seems like a moment of grand luck, but in truth, Aragorn had rallied the surviving members of the Fellowship, with the forces of Gondor and Rohan, in a last-ditch effort to give Frodo and Sam a fighting chance. On the edge of Mount Doom, so very close to achieving their ultimate goal, Frodo at last succumbed to the power of the ring, having been beaten down by the external torments of his journey and his internal battle to resist what no other had been able to fully ward off. As Frodo laid claim to the ring, the pair were attacked by Gollum, who had gone completely mad, biting off Frodo's finger and stealing back the one ring. But no sooner had Gollum recovered his precious, he slipped and fell into the heart of the volcano, not only to his death, but the utter destruction of the ring, saving Frodo and Middle-earth from its clutches. As with many epics of classic myth, the War of the Ring climaxes with a grand final struggle of good versus evil, complete with action, sacrifice, and more than a few moments where it looks as if all hope is lost, before a sudden, defining triumph of the protagonists. The powers of evil were snuffed out by the efforts of the forces of good, and by the hands of fate. Upon the destruction of the One Ring, Sauron is defeated permanently, never again able to retake form or lay claim over Middle-earth. His force is decimated, and his kingdom torn asunder. Frodo and Sam narrowly escaping their doom with the aid of the great eagles. Aragorn assumes his destined role as Elisar, king of Gondor and Arnor, and marries his true love, Arwen, bringing about the days of peace and the reconstruction of Middle-earth. Frodo and the other hobbits make their way home, and after one final skirmish with Saruman's forces in the Shire, they at last find their peace, and try their best to go on with their lives. However, their journey changed them all forever, but none more so than the ring-bearer Frodo. A combination of survivor's guilt, post-traumatic stress, and the lingering effects of the One Ring weighed heavily on Frodo, leading him to leave Middle-earth behind and join Gandalf and the last remaining elves on a ship out of the Grey Havens and into the west, to the Undying Lands, Tolkien's equivalent to Avalon, where he may earn his hero's rest. Author J.R.R. Tolkien remains among the premier literary minds of the modern age, fueling his imaginative stories with personal experiences, influence from classic literature, and no shortage of ancient mythology. Mythology and oral tradition are the oldest forms of storytelling, filled with moral lessons, abstract and artistic renditions of age-old concepts, and answers to unanswerable questions. Having been introduced to mythology and folklore at such a young age, and having continuous exposure to it throughout his life, Tolkien expertly crafted a magical world that beautifully wove together many aspects found within many mythologies. Creationism, heroic journey, self-sacrifice, battles with temptation, themes of good versus evil, man versus monster, honor, personal duty, destiny, redemption, and more. With his writings of Middle-earth, Tolkien set out to create a unique mythology for his country and for the New Age, and in many ways succeeded in doing so. Tolkien's world is filled with gripping stories, far-off places, magical items, otherworldly yet relatable characters, thrilling adventures, passionate romance, heroes, villains, monsters, and everything in between, just like the mythologies of the ancient world. For decades and decades to come, people of all ages have loved Tolkien's legendarium, with countless adaptations and works of fiction inspired by his grand works. The world of Tolkien and the magic and mystery of Middle-earth have long been a portal to the imagination for many who wish to leave their mundane lives for a while, whether for adventure or for escapism. Deep down, we all want to visit a place unlike any other, similar to our world in some ways, but different in a lot of others. And Tolkien is proven capable of bringing us there and back again. When it comes to horror literature and the dark fantasy genre, there is one title that seems to stand out above all others: Dracula. The tale of an ancient and powerful vampire who leaves his homeland to terrorize a new country, and becomes embattled with a handful of brave souls who challenge his ever-growing power and bloodlust. The story is a classic among classics. Every vampire of the modern age, and many horror, thriller, and dark fantasy stories for that matter, owe its thanks to the 1897 novel. Along with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Dracula has become one of the most influential and groundbreaking stories in horror fiction, and it was conceived by the mind of Irish author Bram Stoker. Born Abraham Stoker in Dublin, Ireland, November 8, 1847, the man who would go on to create the story of Dracula was a sickly child in his formative years, bedridden with an undisclosed illness, and cared for by his mother, who entertained him by telling him stories of ghosts, vampires, skeletal creatures, and other dark figures. As he grew up and his health improved, Stoker always kept with him a love for the macabre, the dramatic, and dark yet romanticized storytelling. After graduating from Trinity College of Dublin in 1870, Stoker would relocate to London and become the business manager of the West End's Lyceum Theatre, as well as the personal assistant and manager to actor Sir Henry Irving, a man whom Stoker both admired and felt intimidated by. By 1890, Stoker began work on his magnum opus, Dracula, reading obscure texts and anything he could on vampire legends, superstition, and even dark history from all over Europe, as far east as India, and even across the Atlantic to America. He would continue this avid pursuit for several years, taking copious amounts of notes, and writing and rewriting draft after draft before the book was finally published in 1897. Stoker had many influences for his character of Count Dracula, but perhaps the most widely renowned of all was Vlad III, better known as Vlad Tepes, the Impaler, a voivode of Wallachia in modern-day Romania amid the 15th century. While Vlad has been hailed as a national hero in Romania and was renowned for his prowess as a warlord, he had also garnered a lasting reputation for barbaric cruelty toward his enemies, having famously executed thousands by impaling them on stakes. Vlad's father was known as Vlad Dracul. His sobriquet, meaning dragon or devil, gained upon joining the Order of the Dragon, and adding to the family's fearsome reputation. Vlad III himself would go on to be known as the son of the devil, Dracula. Despite popular belief and notable similarities between them, it must be noted that the real-life Dracula and the fictional character were never stated to be one and the same, though many later adaptations make explicit connections between Stoker's Count and the historical figure. However, many scholars believe that one of the strongest inspirations for the character of Count Dracula was in fact Stoker's employer, Henry Irving. According to Stoker's writings, he viewed Irving to be talented as an actor, and also charismatic and cordial, well-traveled and well-read, cultured, sophisticated. Yet he could be cold, arrogant, even manipulative, traits that are all evident within the legendary vampire. Dracula may be the most famous vampire in all of storytelling history, but he is not the first by any means. Every culture on Earth has some form of vampire lurking in their mythology, each one different from the next, yet all possessing a diet of blood from other creatures, namely humans. Stoker's studies exposed him to a great number of vampire and demon legends, a handful of which had a particularly strong hand in creating the infamous Count. From Irish mythology came a being known as Avertak, a cruel and merciless tyrant who came into conflict with a neighboring chieftain, fabled to be the legendary warrior Finn McCool. Avertak was slain by his rival, but he returned from the grave with a hunger for the blood of the living. Slavic mythology told of the Striga, a reanimated corpse that would fly through the night and consume the blood and the entrails of the living, and even shapeshift into the form of an owl. From Hindu mythology comes the Vatala, a demonic spirit that could possess corpses and cause misfortune such as miscarriage and grave illness. But perhaps the vampire legends with the strongest influence on Dracula come from Eastern European folklore, which depicts the Nosferatu as revenants of deceased witches, suicide victims, and people who were wicked in life, possessed by demonic spirits. But they may also be created by being bitten by a vampire, drinking vampiric blood, or any other method of dark magic. They resembled normal people, yet were a hollow shell, a predatory beast void of humanity, driven only by an endless thirst for blood. These monsters were said to possess uncanny strength, preternatural speed, and razor-sharp senses, and would overpower their victims and bite into them with pronounced fang-like canines. They were powerless when confronted with holy symbols such as the cross, biblical scripture, or by the scent of garlic, and they were said to be unable to set foot on hallowed ground or cross running water. Physical contact with holy water, wafers, or relics was said to burn their very flesh like a corrosive acid, and in order to kill them, they had to be beheaded, staked through the heart, or burned, or any combination of the three. Another notable influence on Stoker was the vampire fiction that preceded him. Primary examples include Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir, about a vampiric narrator who seduces an innocent maiden; John Polidori's The Vampire, the first prose vampire story published in English, about a mysterious aristocrat who seduces young women and drains their blood before vanishing; and 1872's novella Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, about a young woman who is preyed upon by a female vampire. Having picked and chosen various aspects from various mythological, literary, and historical sources, Stoker wrote his famed novel and gave his titular vampire traits, powers, and weaknesses that would come to define the vampire in Western popular culture forevermore. Dracula lived a mysterious life as a lord and warrior, and later returned from his death and continued on living an undead life sustained through the consumption of human blood. He was almost fully nocturnal, sleeping during the day in a coffin filled with the decrepit soil of his homeland. He was unable to cross running water or enter a home without verbal permission, cast a natural shadow, cast a reflection in mirrors, appear on film, or withstand the presence of garlic, and he was vulnerable to fire, holy relics, and could be killed by decapitation and being stabbed through the heart. But his vampirism also granted him superhuman strength and speed, heightened senses, and powers not common to most vampires of myth or prior fiction, such as hypnotic and telepathic capabilities, limited defiance of gravity, the power to shapeshift into bats, wolves, rats, even mist. And he was also capable of limited power over weather, creating violent storms and summoning winds and dense fog. Though Dracula was not the first vampire from either a mythical or literary standpoint, one could argue that the Count was more powerful than any who had come before him, and perhaps even after him. But Dracula not only re-established the vampire's inherent attributes spoken of in mythology, but their general appearance and disposition as well. Whereas the vampires of Eastern European folklore were mindless and rather animal-like, Count Dracula was intelligent, charming, with impeccable manners and good breeding, and he was more than capable of showing love, remorse, pleasure, hate, vengeance, and even fear. In many ways, Dracula is the ultimate monster, and yet he is still very much human at his core. In the novel, Count Dracula seeks to expand his hunting grounds and move out west from Transylvania to London, England. In order to secure his new properties around London, as well as gain a better understanding of English culture and modern society, Dracula enlists freshly appointed English solicitor Jonathan Harker. Jonathan travels from England to Transylvania, feeling more than a fleeting sense of exiting the world he knew and entering a strange and unfamiliar one, made only more unsettling by the locals' superstitious fear of the undead and the alleged curse surrounding Dracula. Upon arriving at Dracula's home, an ancient and decaying castle, Jonathan is greeted cordially by his host, and impressed with the man's hospitality, intelligence, and historical knowledge, detailing horrific scenes of ancient battles past, as if he himself were there to see them. But soon Jonathan gradually gets overwhelmed by an ever-growing sense of dread, and that things are not what they seem to be. What we see here is an old trope in horror storytelling, and monster stories in general, of a monster luring the unsuspecting into their clutches, seen in Slavic stories of Baba Yaga and various Grimm fairy tales. Events get stranger during Jonathan's stay, as he learns more of Dracula's history and of his true nature, culminating in him being seduced and attacked by 3 gorgeous vampiric women, the brides of Dracula, and saved from death by Dracula himself, who gives his brides a baby to feed upon. Dracula's brides are heavily influenced by an Irish vampire legend, the Darach Dua, the Red Bloodsucker, who appeared as a beautiful young woman that seduces men in a succubus-like fashion, before killing them and drinking their blood. But whereas the Darach Dua is said to be a solitary monster, Stoker multiplied the beautiful terror by 3. Simple, yet effective. Dracula leaves Jonathan behind in the castle, at the mercy of his brides, left to die, and it is only through Herculean effort that Jonathan manages to escape the castle and find refuge at a monastery in Budapest. Meanwhile, Dracula charters a ship called the Demeter to take him and his belongings, most notably many crates of Transylvanian soil, from Romania to England. The ship's voyage, recorded in the captain's log, is a nightmare. Storms come in fast out of nowhere, and the crew is killed off one by one by the vampire aboard. As Dracula feeds on his victims, he gradually gets younger in appearance, going from an ancient-looking man to a handsome and strong man in the prime of his life, likely resembling his state when he had become a vampire originally. The idea of consuming or bathing in blood, both human and animal, in order to gain youth, is found throughout folklore of Eastern Europe. But it is likely that Stoker gained inspiration for this aspect from Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman, and one of the many real-life inspirations behind another blood-soaked nightmare, Bloody Mary. Between the years 1590 and 1610, Bathory was accused of vampirism and charged with killing at least 80 girls and young women, having subjected them to sickening torture, sewing their lips shut, beating them with clubs, and burning them with red-hot iron, before bathing in their blood in order to maintain a youthful appearance. The Demeter crashes on the coast of Whitby, England, where Dracula begins his new reign of terror, and where Jonathan Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray, is on holiday with her close friend, the wealthy and beautiful Lucy Westenra. Lucy is the object of desire of 3 suitors: the aristocratic Arthur Holmwood, Texan Quincy Morris, and Dr. John Seward, and soon becomes the target of Dracula. As Mina gets word of Jonathan's condition in Budapest and leaves at once to be with him, the vampire feeds upon Lucy and begins to turn her into a vampire, condemning her to living death. As the transformation takes hold, Lucy falls gravely ill, in a manner not too dissimilar from the title character in Carmilla, and desperation grows to the point that John is forced to call upon his mentor for aid, the eccentric, yet brilliant, Professor Abraham Van Helsing. In many ways, Van Helsing is very much the heroic force in Stoker's novel, even sharing the author's first name. From a storytelling standpoint, he is the mystical aide who guides the protagonists through their journey, much like the wizard Merlin in Arthurian legend, or the great one, Tai Genren, from the Chinese tale of Nezha. While many characters of this caliber are magical and nearly godlike in intelligence, Van Helsing is very much a human being. He is a renowned surgeon, philosopher, a leading expert on obscure diseases, and is secretly an expert on vampires, demons, and the occult. Upon arrival, Van Helsing does all he can to help the poor woman, offering multiple blood transfusions and using rings of garlic when he suspects the work of a vampire. Sadly, Lucy dies of her illness, but Van Helsing knows it's not over just yet. His instincts prove correct as reports circulate of a woman in white kidnapping children and draining them of their blood. Van Helsing, John, Arthur, and Quincy all go to her tomb one night and discover that she has risen from the grave, has become Nosferatu, a vampire. After a confrontation, the 4 men succeed in killing her, staking her through the heart, beheading her, and filling her mouth with garlic. Lucy's transformation into a vampire, like much of the story of Dracula, is partly rooted in ancient myths, resembling the classic image of the White Lady ghost of folklore, but was also strongly influenced by vampire hysteria of a more recent time. In the late 1800s, in Exeter, Rhode Island, a case of tuberculosis had stricken the family of Mercy Brown, first claiming the lives of Mercy's mother and older sister in 1884, before Mercy herself succumbed to the illness in January of 1892, at the age of 19. Rumor began to circulate among the townsfolk. The family were no doubt the victims of vampires. Or perhaps one among them was in fact a vampire. After some prodding from the populace, Mercy's father, George Brown, gave permission to exhume the corpses of his wife and daughters on March 17, 1892. Though the first 2 bodies had decomposed to the point of skeletons, Mercy's, was noticeably intact, perhaps due to the winter's cold staving off bacteria and other microorganisms, though that would not have occurred to the superstitious lot of the time. Upon closer inspection from the town's doctor, an autopsy revealed Mercy still had liquid blood within her heart, proving to the townsfolk that Mercy was indeed a vampire, and they burned her heart and her liver. Mercy Brown was not a vampire in reality, but her story spread, with no shortage of supernatural embellishment, and eventually came to the attention of Bram Stoker. Determined to stop Dracula once and for all, Van Helsing rallies Lucy's suitors and the returned Jonathan Harker against the nefarious vampire, using Dr. Seward's asylum as a base of operations. As the hunt begins, Dracula finds a way into the asylum through Seward's patient, the insane R.M. Renfield, who eats flies and spiders and other vermin in an attempt to absorb their life forces, and whom Dracula promises eternal life. Here we see another common element of paranormal stories, where dark figures such as vampires, ghosts, and demons have a unique and utterly terrifying effect upon the mentally ill. In fact, old superstitions in many parts of the world claim that mental illness was the result of a vampire or demon's work. In retaliation for killing Lucy, Dracula attacks Mina, drinking her blood on 3 separate occasions, and having her drink his blood on his final visit, cursing her with vampirism. Upon her death, Mina would be doomed to become a vampire, unless they can find a way to kill Dracula first. With odds raised against them more than ever, Van Helsing's hunting party proceed to raid Carfax Abbey and other properties purchased by the Count, and destroy each of the boxes of earth, placing holy wafers within them, rendering them useless to the vampire. After a brief confrontation with Dracula in his Piccadilly house, they all learn that Dracula is fleeing to his castle in Transylvania with his last box. But all is not lost, as Mina has a faint psychic connection to Dracula, which the party uses to track down the monster. Many times in folklore, a hero winds up having to face down a monster in their lair, even if it means losing an advantage of battlefield selection. In Greek mythology, Heracles, better known as Hercules, cornered the Nemean lion in its own den to gain an advantage over the invulnerable beast, and later defeated Cerberus in the underworld, as he was left with no other choice. In Beowulf, the titular character fights Grendel's mother, and later on a dragon in their respective lairs, partly out of confidence in his own abilities, and partly to spare innocent casualties. In English folklore, Sir John Lambton fights the dragon known as the Lambton Worm within a fast-flowing river as a means to counter the beast's regenerative abilities. This instance, with Dracula and Van Helsing's party, is no different in nature. The hunters make their way to Romania, and the final battle begins. Van Helsing slays Dracula's brides. Jonathan and the others pursue Dracula's coffin as it rides with Dracula's Romani servants. All the while, Mina's health gradually weakens more and more. After a hard fight between the hunters and Dracula's minions, where Quincy becomes mortally wounded, Jonathan manages to decapitate Dracula, as Quincy stabs him in the heart with his bowie knife before succumbing to his own wounds. Dracula crumbles to dust, freeing Mina from the vampiric curse and ridding the world of its greatest monster. In the years since its publication, Dracula by Bram Stoker has become an essential in not only horror fiction, but English literature as a whole, with its deep themes of good versus evil, science versus magic, humanity, sexuality, madness, and sanity, coupled with its gothic elements, and compelling characters influenced by mythology, folklore, superstition, pre-existing literature, and even history, make the story truly timeless. The character of Count Dracula has become one of the most studied and celebrated villains in all of fiction, changing the way we look at vampires and monsters forever. The story of Dracula has been adapted into stage plays, radio productions, modern literature, comic books, and countless films, with the notorious Count being played by some of the best actors of Hollywood history, including Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, and Gary Oldman. As the quintessential vampire book and horror tale, the story of Dracula has become embedded within popular culture for all time, granting Bram Stoker and his legendary novel a form of everlasting life.